Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. What a week. We have so much to get to here. We got the gathering of premiers in Ottawa, some tough talk by Premier David Eby, the BC Greens putting one of BC's most powerful people on his back heels, and the BC Conservative leadership race getting heated already. We're going to not waste any time and dive right into it by bringing in our pod squad, Jillian Oliver, Angelo Isidorou, and returning from the wilds of Prince George, where, according to his lawyer, no permanent harm was done to Mr. PG, Jeff Ferrier. Jeff, welcome back.
Thanks. I should have known better. My mom taught me to walk the line, because if I didn't watch out, I'd be serving hard time. And a note of thanks, if it wasn't for the GoFundMe, I'd still be behind bars in Prince George.
That's true. That's true. But you're the big boss man, and you are here. You are here to take us through some of this. I'm going to come to you first, but I do want to just first hear from Premier David Eby. Here he is attending the Council of Federation meeting in Ottawa this week. He, unprompted, off the top of an availability with reporters, had this to say about separatists in Alberta who went to Washington to meet with officials from Donald Trump's administration and ask him for financial aid to leave Canada. Here he is.
Free speech, that's important. But to go to a foreign country and to ask for assistance in breaking up Canada, there's an old-fashioned word for that. And that word is treason.
Treason. The Premier coming out swinging there, Jeff. Interestingly, Doug Ford, usually the one who says stuff like this, when he was asked, he said, "Oh, I don't know, that was a bit far." What did you make of the Premier doing this and why he might be saying something like that?
I think he chose to say these things because he saw advantage in him as stepping up as a voice for Canadian unity. I think leading on Trump puts him in the strongest spot from a political opinion perspective. And I think in his gut, he just believes it. He sees folks seeking $500 billion from the U.S. State Department to facilitate Canada's breakup. He sees that as folks doing the bidding of Trump at a time when we should be coming together to push back. Sees people wearing cowboy hats, thinks they should be wearing MAGA hats. Look, and the point that we're even talking about Alberta separatism is a proof point of why it's bad. It's a distraction. We should be talking about Donald Trump, the tariffs, the new tariffs he's threatening on us, 100% tariffs at one point, now tariffs on Bombardier jets. It's in his gut. And I think from a political perspective, it puts him in the strongest possible spot that he can be in.
Okay. Jillian, what did you think? I was left trying to figure out why, but I don't know if you, maybe that's just the question.
Yeah, I think so. Well, maybe Jeff's right that it is for multiple reasons. It was interesting. Sometimes premiers say stuff like this and it maybe was just sort of shooting from the hip, but it seemed really deliberate because not only did he say it unprompted off the top of his remarks, but he also posted it on social media, which is a good way to tell if someone really meant as a sort of strategy to say something. I think another reason could have been because he was concerned about the softness of the Prime Minister's remarks. They went to a press conference all together following Eby's remarks, and I was kind of struck by how soft Carney's response was to that. He said he expects the U.S. To respect our sovereignty, and it's pretty clear that Trump has, already crossed that line many times. So I wonder if he did feel genuinely like it just somebody needed to come out really strongly. It is a really strong word. I wonder, I think it's obvious, also clear it doesn't meet the legal definition, but he kind of owned the news cycle and came out swinging early before everybody got a chance to talk to the rest of the leaders. So, on that mark, I think it was a win for him.
Yeah, he does tend to do that in first ministers' meetings. Remember his I Heart heat pump shirt, and he's always got something that he does where he tries to get in the headlines. Angelo, what do you think of his comment?
I agree with Jillian. I think it was deliberate. It was unprompted. He's promoting it. I mean, I wish Premier Eby was as passionate about extortion on the streets of Surrey as he is about treason from separatists in a different province. I find it strange because ultimately this is not really an issue in British Columbia. I do think that it is for the clicks and for social media to basically go out and say, hey, this thing that everyone finds unpopular in separatism, I also find it unpopular. And aren't I so great? I think ultimately, if the premier were serious about the issue, the best way to respond to these separatists or to even Trump's aggression is to support a major nation building project like a pipeline. I think going out and virtue signaling about an issue that's not really a serious issue or an issue that anyone, I think, should take seriously is a deflection on the major issues here at home.
Well, let's go around on the pipeline then, because the Prime Minister called Eby and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith into a room. They sat down for a photo op. Everyone's going, oh, maybe they have a pipeline deal. The only thing we learned in the course of the week is the Alberta Premier saying it's not going to follow the Northern Gateway route, won't end in Kitimat, and she's going to put the more information in the hands of the Premier when she has it towards June. Jeff, pipeline, photo op, mean anything? What did you think when you saw that?
I was interested to see the Premier move from purism to pragmatism. Obviously, he's taken a look at the tools in the toolbox, as John Horgan did when he was the Premier, seeing there's not a lot there that BC constitutionally can do. I think, though, he was very clear on where there are tools in British Columbia, and that is on First Nations. The Prime Minister is committed to getting consent from First Nations in affected areas for the pipeline to proceed. And the Premier is pointing to that as one of the bigger roadblocks, that and the fact that there's no proponent, no route, no private sector money for this. And I'm glad Angelo brought up extortion. The Premier got the Prime Minister to provide more police and helicopter support for those efforts. Doug McCallum has been pushing for a helicopter.
And a meeting.
Now he's got one.
Yeah. I think they're all going to come to Surrey too. He got that.
Yeah. Plus the more police, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Jillian, pipeline discussion, again, kind of also dominates the issue, but we don't get anywhere on any of it. What do you think?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think obviously this is the number one priority for Premier Smith, and it was interesting to see the sort of difference in her communications after the meeting versus Eby's, where she was kind of solely focused on that, whereas Eby didn't talk about it at all, talked about a whole bunch of other projects and things that they could work together on and work with other provinces on. The Kitimat thing is really interesting because I think that actually might be bigger news than we might think. When Northern Gateway was proposed, they did look at alternate routes and actually found that it was really challenging to and potentially financially prohibitive to build through the mountains, going anywhere else other than to Kitimat. So I wonder if maybe that is actually reassuring to Eby that this makes it less likely to go ahead. But we still don't know. We'll just kind of have to wait and see as that keeps moving forward.
Yeah, we also heard Danielle Smith talk a little bit more about the Trans Mountain expansion, saying that'll help be a pressure relief valve, which lines up with what David Eby's been pushing as well. Angelo, pipeline, but also, is there room? I did a Board of Trade event in the past week and the pipeline issue came up and I was sort of saying, well, what if BC got offered a whole bunch of money for its incredibly bad budget that's coming up and they could use that money to fund something from the pipeline like childcare or something like that? Would that be a way out for the Premier? Do we ever think he's going to get there, or where do you think he might be going on the pipeline?
I think, him visiting Carney and Smith it must on some level signal that he's going to have to make concessions on this issue. The majority of British Columbians actually want a pipeline. We've seen this from Angus Reid. I do think that the Premier needs to stop with the narrative of there's no proponent, no route, no money, when he defends issues and policies like the tanker ban that make private proposals very difficult. And even when there have been prospective projects, he calls it like an energy vampire, I think he called it, or communications exercise. I think there is interest in this province, but I think that, to quote one of our MLAs, Larry Neufeld, the Premier can't keep slamming the door and wonder why nobody knocks.
It's not bad. It's not a bad quote from Larry Neufeld. Okay, all right, we'll leave it there because coming up next, we're going to take a look at the BC Greens going after businessman Jimmy Pattison, coming up after this break.
Yesterday, I called for a boycott on BC billionaire Jim Pattison to cut his ties with ICE. This is what happens when one evil billionaire owns our food supply. They control the market, they extort working families, and then they use those record profits to buy up even more of our lives.
That is BC Green leader Emily Lowen talking about evil billionaire. Her words, not mine. Don't sue me. Jimmy Pattison, after news one of his company's warehouses in Virginia was being sold to the U.S. government to be used as an Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, facility. ICE, of course, being the federal arm that Donald Trump is using to crack down and cause protests and try to detain people illegally in the country. There have been conflicts and deaths. Late breaking news on Friday, Jimmy Pattison announcing that they will not proceed with that sale to the U.S. government. Jillian, that seems like a win for the Greens, like raising it, getting attention for it, driving it, and taking the wealthiest man, I think he's the wealthiest man in BC, backwards to the point he has to reverse. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a win for them. It's a really challenging environment for opposition parties when you have an external threat like Trump. It reminds me a lot of COVID. I think, people really want unity. And so it's really hard for opposition parties to break through without seeming like they're being divisive. But going after somebody who is not the government to get attention on a political issue like this is such a good strategy because it can be unifying as well. And then getting the result in addition to all the attention, I think, kind of wraps up the week really nicely for them. And it really speaks to the brand that Lowen is kind of trying to build with the Greens, positioning them as for the little guy, creating an alternative narrative of, what's at the source of our problems other than reconciliation and like woke ideology. It's billionaires and wealth inequality. I think that rings true for a lot of people. We're seeing it be a successful strategy for other Green parties, like in the UK, where they're polling at record highs of like 20% right now. So it'll be interesting to see where they can take this forward. And, I think the next thing is to tie it more to issues that affect British Columbians a bit more materially, because at the end of the day, this is sort of like a bit more of a moralistic issue of something happening in the States. But I think it was a win for them this week.
Yeah. Angelo, fight the oligarchs into evil billionaires. There's definitely a narrative from Lowen and the Greens. What do you make of what you're seeing from them?
Well, it reminds me a little bit of us when we first started out, in the sense of when you're a small party in opposition, you have to get attention somehow. And sometimes you need to take, a little bit of an unconventional path to pick an issue. And if it works out, it's great because you get a ton of attention. And if I was the Greens right now, I'm probably seeing, some emails coming in, maybe even some donations by virtue of the fact that they went out and, gave it their all on this particular issue. And it appears to have worked from a public pressure standpoint. So I'm very fascinated by the Emily Lowen brand of the Greens, in the sense that it seems to be very different from what was there before. It seems to be evolving into what I see to be, a populist movement on the left that is focused on the oligarchs. It reminds me a little bit of what we're seeing in New York with Mamdani in terms of progressivism. So I think it was an interesting win on her part, and it gives credence to the overall issue of the American-Canadian trade relations right now. They're not just exclusive to what's happening in terms of trade. They're bleeding into other issues, and this is a property that Jimmy Pattison owns, and just by virtue of the drama and the chaos we're seeing from ICE, it seems to have been the case where the juice wasn't worth the squeeze.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff, you could kind of almost see this coming, because when the Attorney General, Nikki Sharma, got asked about it earlier in the week, she said, that the province is watching with horror what's happening in the United States, and all business owners should think about their roles and not do anything to further those outcomes, which was more than she needed to say, I think. But clearly the Greens had tapped into something there that was getting echoed throughout the week.
Yeah, they sure did. And they did it in a venue where historically the NDP has been strong in standing up for working people compared to the rich and the powerful. And I think it's a lesson for the NDP that it's more than words that you need to break through on an issue. Here she gave actionable solutions on how to take on these folks. She talked about, the Jimmy Pattison ICE headquarters in Virginia. She also talked, though, about boycotting Save On Foods. And boy, this must have been a awkward day for Daryl Jones, the former head of Pattison food section, announcing that he was going to run on governing BC like Jimmy Pattison runs business. We might not agree on those things here, but we can agree that that's really bad timing. And maybe we could also agree that Save On is a ripoff. I don't know. He spent a lot of money on groceries there, more than any place else.
Where do you shop, Jeff? Where's your grocery store of choice?
I have to go to Save On because it's the one in the neighborhood, which is why I feel so strongly about this.
All right. Well, that's personal. Politics is personal, and for you, it's Save On. But okay, we're going to take a break there. Coming up next, a whole lot of moving and shaking and fighting and rocking and rolling in the BC Conservative race right after this.
When real BC Conservatives were fighting for you and formed the official opposition, where was Caroline? She was still writing donation checks to the United Liberals, even after the election. Now that our party is winning, she wants to lead it?
All right, that is businessman Yuri Fulmer's sudden attack ad Thursday against fellow BC Conservative candidate Carolyn Elliott. Just one of many developments in the Conservative race this week. We will get to as many as we can and put some more in our audio extras in the podcast, but we'll start here. Angelo, let's just start with you. You know, you are on the leadership team, the LEOC, I think it's called for short, on the race. There's a clause in there about not disparaging other candidates. How does LEOC manage that in real time on situations like this?
Well, it is subjective, right? And I think there is an expectation that these candidates are going to attack each other. I don't think anyone had this sort of Pollyanna expectation that this was going to be, you know, the most perfect, kind-hearted, collegial race ever, right? I mean, these people are running with the expectation and the intent that, hey, if I win, I have a real shot at becoming premier. So I think it's going to be very competitive. I think LEOC ultimately reserves the right to see when something crosses the line and keeps an eye on it, right? I think there is an understanding that there's competition, but there's also an understanding that, hey, you know, some remarks or something may come out that is just too far, and we reserve the right to look into it when that happens.
Yeah. Jeff, what did you think of it? It's early for starters. I mean, I don't think anyone, Angelo, no one has actually been approved as a candidate and gone through the process. Okay, so there's no technical candidates really even. Very early, what does it say to you that there's this attack ad out and it's framed like it is about Carolyn Elliott being a liberal, you know, sister-in-law to Kevin Falcon, BC United vice president, and then a big long list of donations to the former Liberal Party. What do you think?
I think it's some intense ideological infighting for the heart of the right-wing vote in this leadership race. I'm not surprised that at the outset, candidates who see themselves as that standard bearer, as the candidate of the populist right, as the true blue conservative, are going after one another because there's a big voter base there, and they want to define the people who are competing with them for those votes as not true conservatives. And that's happening between Yuri Fulmer and Carolyn Elliott, who are both in that direction, and now Carolyn Finley, who, by the way, someone please give her an iPhone. Her launch video looks like it was filmed on a VHS camcorder from 1987. But it's about defining your opponent as not what the voter base you need to get you across the finish line wants. And it's not surprising. You have one chance to make a first impression with voters, and this is it. This is now, and that's why it's happening now.
Jillian, does it not also make it look like Fulmer is worried that Carolyn Elliott is the front runner in the race? And there was not even any part of this ad that said vote Fulmer. It was just like Carolyn Elliott's bad all the way to the end. Yeah. No counter proposition. You've done a lot of campaigns. Like, what's the point of an ad this early and an ad like that that doesn't do anything for your candidate?
I think it seemed like a bit of a defensive move and maybe a bit of an overswing. Fulmer he's sort of a political neophyte. It's funny because even though he's trying to paint himself as like the OG conservative of the race, he actually hasn't ever been elected before and probably has been around politics the least long among a lot of the candidates. But he was getting online flack for some of his company's ties to things like reconciliation initiatives and climate initiatives. And I wonder if he was trying to shift focus away from that, perhaps not realizing that those, attacks were kind of just happening on Twitter and might not have been seen by most of the base. That's kind of what it read like to me. And yeah, I think it did have the inadvertent effect of making Elliott seem like the front runner that often happens in leadership races. And she had a response that I thought was, pretty strong, saying that she's going to be unifying. It's the infighting that's been tearing us apart, which is absolutely true. That's kind of what led to Restad having to step down in the first place, was his inability to stop the infighting and hold people together. But you're right, it is really early. It's going to be interesting to see if the attacks and the arguments between them evolve beyond this sort of purity test of who's a real conservative and who's not, and if they actually get more focused on the issues and more focused on what the party should be for instead of what it should be against.
Jeff, just to go back to you on this, like I'm watching the Fuller campaign. Yuri Fuller. I keep saying Fulmer. Apologies to Yuri on that. So
I'll tell you what he's Fuller.
He has done several things that have kind of boomeranged back on him a little bit. He's pointing to Carolyn Elliott's donations to the Liberals. Well, he made donations to the Liberals. There is the whole temporary foreign worker thing that is being used at A&W. There is, sort of various other kind of things that have come back on him. The not supporting DRIPA when, his company used to have something on its website saying it should be expanded. The Great Bear Rainforest Coastal First Nations thing where he donated, in a campaign, when your candidate's past actions don't match up with the tax, how dangerous is that?
Well, it's dangerous. Again, they have one chance to make a first impression, and Fulmer has been getting own goal after own goal after own goal. And if you're part of that group of true blue conservatives, the populist conservatives who's looking for the leader who's going to carry the party in that ideological direction into the premier's office, you want to have someone who is tested in campaigns and shows that they have the mettle to do that. Fulmer's had a series of gaffes, which is going to create in those voters' minds, is this the leader that we need? And I think for a lot of them, they're asking a lot of questions, and maybe now looking at Elliott and now Carolyn Finley a lot more seriously.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. More discussion about this in the audio podcast of the show. Make sure you subscribe. Thank you to the Pod Squad for being here. Thank you for listening, watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/homesoon.